About a month into France, something very predictable happens. The excitement fades just a little bit. Not because anything has gone wrong, not because you made a bad decision, but because reality starts to show its edges. And I want to say this clearly right at the start. If you feel unsettled around this point, you're exactly where most people are. There's a quiet moment around week 3 or 4 where people think, I thought I'd feel a little more settled than this. And that thought alone can create a lot of unnecessary self-doubt. Quick note before we go any further, if you're already in France or you're coming soon, our newsletter exists for this exact phase. It's calm, practical, and grounded in what actually happens month by month once you arrive. It helps people recognize these moments early, I think, before they cost money, energy, or confidence. The link's below. Here's how this phase usually unfolds. Most people arrive with momentum. They've planned for months, sometimes years. They've sold homes, packed lives into boxes, said emotional goodbyes. There's an assumption, often unspoken, that once you're physically here, clarity should follow fairly quickly. It doesn't. And that gap between expectation and reality is where friction creeps in. People try to compensate by pushing harder, more emails, more follow-ups, more chasing, a belief that effort equals speed. And fairly quickly, France teaches its first lesson. France has its own rhythm, and fighting it doesn't make things move faster. It just creates frustration. What really throws people is how admin works here, for example. When something happens, it often happens properly, thoroughly, sometimes even efficiently. But beforehand, it can feel like nothing is happening at all. I'm talking long silences, no updates, no reassurance. That space between yes, it's fine and visible, tangible progress you can put your hand on is where your mind starts working overtime. Banking is usually one of the first places this shows up. You submit everything, you're told it's complete, and then nothing. Days pass, sometimes, or actually often weeks. No reply, no context. The visa steps often, felt similar, and healthcare registration too. You're told things are underway, but replies are deprioritized. There's no running commentary. You're just expected to sit there and wait. And emotionally, waiting without context really just feels like limbo. Another good one would be, housing. That comes along and amplifies everything too. An estate agent says, yeah, tout va bien, all good, we'll send the lease, and then a week goes by, sometimes 10 days, and nothing is sent across for you to sign. No explanation, no update. And of course, your brain fills in the gaps. Maybe they forgot about us. Maybe another tenant came along. Maybe the insurance company blocked it. Maybe they've quietly chosen someone else. At this point, most people slow their search without realizing it. They assume the place is basically secured. They stop pushing alternatives. They don't chase other viewings, and suddenly their whole leverage disappears. This is usually when the fear turns financial. Ultimately that would result in another Airbnb extension, another short notice booking, another bill. People often describe this as money stress, but actually money isn't always the real issue here. What's actually hurting, I would say, is just this constant uncertainty. Humans can obviously adapt surprisingly well to higher costs if they feel stable. What we struggle with is not knowing where we stand, not knowing if the ground under our feet is solid. That's why around the 1 month mark, people often start adjusting budgets, not to chase luxury, not because they've abandoned their plan, but because they want that certainty. They crave that side to it. They want the waiting to stop. They want a base. And I see this all the time. I remember helping a couple looking around the Bergerac area and wanting to keep costs low, sensible and cautious. It was all really well thought out. They found something cheap, and technically on their criteria, I guess it worked. But day to day, it felt thin, temporary, almost like student accommodation, somewhere you tolerate rather than settle into. As a result, they increased their budget slightly, not dramatically or anything, and suddenly they were in a beautiful place by the water, calm and comfortable, somewhere they actually enjoyed being. So their original plan was to buy fairly quickly in year 2, and now they might stay longer, not because of a big strategic decision, but because life quietly stabilized. And this is where another layer kicks in, one people rarely expect. Around 1 month in, a strange kind of remorse can show up. It's not like dramatic regret, not like, oh, we should never have moved here. It's like a quieter feeling that can be a little bit awkward to admit to. I guess it's homesickness, missing small things you didn't realize mattered so much back home. I had a client say to me recently that what surprised him most wasn't the admin or the housing, it was how much he missed walking into his squash club back home. No planning here, no logistics. It's just showing up, knowing people, having that rhythm built into his week already. Like, he didn't have to think about it. Since arriving in France, that routine obviously gone. He has finding a new club, understanding how things work, building that same ease, it suddenly feels like a mountain. And I think this really catches people off guard, because when you plan a move, you plan the big things, the visa, the housing, the budgets, the healthcare. And sadly, very few people properly plan the small, repeatable anchors of life. That Tuesday night sport, if that's your thing, the casual coffee after, the familiar faces you don't have to explain yourself to. When those disappear, it can knock confidence more than people expect. People realize often too late that they didn't prioritize these things enough, and rebuilding them feels daunting, almost exhausting, on top of everything else. This is where people can start to withdraw in themselves a bit. They exercise less, they socialize less, they tell themselves, well, I can tackle that after, once everything else is settled. And that's when France can start to feel harder than it needs to. So I guess here's the important thing to hear. This phase is not a sign you have made a mistake. It's a sign you're transitioning from fantasy to the real deal, the lived reality. There is rarely a single aha moment 1 month in. No clear breakthrough, no sudden clarity. Instead, things just shift quietly. You stop assuming silence means failure. You stop fighting the system. You stop swimming upstream. You start designing your life around rhythm rather than speed. And slowly, I'm sure you will rebuild your anchors. Not all at once, and probably not perfectly. You're going to be trying different things, but enough to feel human again. If you're already in France and feeling this way, I assure you nothing has gone wrong. And if you're coming soon, knowing this in advance, I think is pretty powerful. You can plan buffers, financial, emotional, and social. You can prioritize routines, not just paperwork. You can keep searching even when something feels nearly done. You can avoid paying for certainty in panic mode. I've said this loads of times this channel, but I'll say it again. France rewards patience far more than pressure, and it rewards people who rebuild daily life, not just the admin, far more than those who try to brute force the system anyway. If this helps put words to something you've been feeling, please give us a like. It helps us get the message out there. And just remember, you're not behind, you're not failing, you're just 1 month in. Thanks for watching.